The highway stretched empty in both directions, heat shimmering off black asphalt that cut through miles of scrubland and sage. I'd been driving for 3 hours straight, windows down, because the AC in my truck had quit working 2 months back when I still had money for repairs. Construction work in Vegas had dried up faster than I expected. 1 week I was framing houses in Henderson, steady paycheck and overtime. Then the developer went bankrupt, and we all got let go on a Thursday afternoon. Spent 6 weeks burning through savings that weren't meant to last, applying everywhere, getting nothing back. The eviction notice came on a Monday. I had 2 weeks. Then I saw the ad online. Night custodian position, maximum security facility, immediate hire, housing included. I should have known something was wrong right then. Jobs don't come that easy. My grandmother's voice had been in my head the whole drive. Shannon used to tell me stories when I was a kid, sitting on her porch in the evening while the desert cooled down around us. Stories about our family's Paiute heritage, about places where the land held onto things that happened, where spirits refused to rest. She'd point out toward the hills and talk about spots you didn't go after dark, about respecting what you couldn't see. I'd nodded along, respectful but not really believing. Folklore, old traditions that didn't mean much to a guy trying to make rent in Las Vegas. Funny how desperation changes your thinking. Blackwater Penitentiary appeared in the distance around 2:30 in the afternoon. The facility rose out of flat desert like something that shouldn't exist out here, all concrete and razor wire catching the sun. Guard towers at each corner, high walls the color of sun-bleached bone. No trees anywhere near it, no vegetation except the sage and scrub that didn't know better. I pulled off the highway onto an access road that hadn't been repaved in years. Felt every crack and pothole rattle through my truck's worn suspension. The guard at the outer checkpoint barely looked at me, just checked my ID against his clipboard and waved me through toward the visitor parking lot. I parked between a dusty sedan and an empty space with oil stains, killed the engine, sat there for a minute. Last chance to turn around. But I thought about the eviction notice folded in my glove box, the $12 in my checking account, the way the property manager had looked at me when I'd asked for an extension. I got out. The heat hit immediately, dry and relentless, different from Vegas heat somehow, emptier. The main entrance sat at the end of a concrete walkway, metal detector visible through reinforced glass doors. Everything about the place felt designed to make you understand you didn't belong here. Warden Kennedy Stevenson met me in a small office just past the security checkpoint. She was maybe 45, professional in a way that made my work boots and faded jeans feel even more threadbare. Wire-rimmed glasses, hair pulled back tight, uniform pressed with sharp creases. "Mr. Luna." She didn't offer to shake hands, just gestured to a chair across from her desk. I sat. She had a folder already open in front of her, my application on top. I'd filled it out 3 days ago, desperate enough to drive out here for an interview that might not happen. She'd called that same evening. "The position is night custodian," she said. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. You'll be responsible for maintenance and cleaning of administrative areas, cell blocks when they're secure, and common facilities. Standard janitorial work. I nodded. The ad mentioned housing. On-site quarters in the staff residence building. Single room, shared bathroom facilities, kitchenette access, rent-free as part of your compensation package. She pulled several papers from the folder, turned them to face me. Employment contract, benefits information, facility protocols. The word protocols should have made me pause, should have made me ask questions. Instead, I looked at the salary figure on the contract. $32,000 a year wasn't much, but with no rent, it meant I could start saving again, could get back on my feet. When would I start? Tonight, if you're willing. Blake Doyle, our veteran custodian, works the current night shift. He'll train you for the first week, then move to a different rotation. She pushed a pen across the desk. I picked it up. Scanned the first page of the contract. Standard employment language. At-will terms. Nothing that jumped out as unusual. The protocol packet underneath looked thick, maybe 30 pages of small print about security procedures and facility regulations. Shannon's voice whispered in my head again. Read before you sign, mijo. Always know what you're agreeing to. But Kennedy was watching me with the patient expression of someone who'd already decided I'd take the job, who knew I didn't have other options. The eviction notice sat in my truck. $12 wouldn't get me through another week. I signed. Kennedy countersigned, tucked the contract back into her folder. Blake will meet you at the residence building at 10:30. Get settled in your room first. He'll explain your duties before the shift starts. Thank you. The words came out rougher than I intended. She stood, which meant I should too. Welcome to Blackwater, Mr. Luna. The staff residence building sat on the facility's east side, separate from the main prison blocks but still inside the outer fence. 3 stories of institutional architecture that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. My room was on the 2nd floor, number 207, accessed through a stairwell that smelled like industrial cleaner and old cigarette smoke. The room itself, twin bed with a thin mattress, metal desk and chair, narrow closet, single window with bars on the outside and a view of the parking lot. Shared bathroom down the hall. I'd stayed in worse during lean stretches between construction jobs. I brought my 2 duffel bags up from the truck, unpacked the essentials. Didn't take long. Then I sat on the bed and waited, watching the sun drop toward the horizon through the barred window. At 10:25, someone knocked. Blake Doyle stood in the hallway looking like he'd aged badly and knew it. Stocky build gone soft, thinning hair, eyes that had seen things they didn't want to remember. His custodial uniform hung loose on him, keys jangling from his belt. You're Luna. Not a question. Yeah, Joel. Blake, come on. We need to talk before shift starts. He didn't wait for me to respond, just turned and headed down the hallway. I followed him down to the 1st floor, through a side door I hadn't noticed earlier, into a maintenance area with concrete floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. Cleaning supplies lined metal shelves, industrial mops and buckets. Everything organized with the precision of someone who'd worked here too long. Blake shut the door behind us, pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Kennedy gave you the official protocols. He didn't make it a question. Yeah. Haven't read through all of them yet. Doesn't matter. Most of that's standard facility bullshit. Security clearances, which areas you can access, when, how to log your rounds. He unfolded the paper, smoothed it against a workbench. These are the real protocols, the ones that keep you alive. The paper was covered in handwritten rules numbered 1 through 9. Blake's handwriting, I figured, or maybe someone before him. The ink looked faded in places, like the list had been copied and recopied. Read them, Blake said. I stepped closer, scanned the first few lines. The rules sounded like the kind of superstitious bullshit you'd find on the internet. Don't go to certain areas after certain times. If you hear voices, don't respond. If the lights flicker in a specific pattern, leave immediately. This is a joke, right? Blake's expression didn't change. Miguel Long thought so too. He was your predecessor, been working here almost 8 months, started thinking he knew better than the protocols. What happened to him? 3 weeks ago, he heard sounds coming from the basement level. Old morgue area, been closed for years. Protocol says you hear anything from down there, you log it and leave. Don't investigate. Don't go near the access door. Blake's voice dropped lower. Miguel went to check it out instead. Security footage shows him going down the stairs around 2:15 a.m. And? Never came back up. They searched the entire basement level, every room, every corner. Found his flashlight near the morgue entrance still on. Blake tapped the list. These rules aren't suggestions. You follow them exactly, or you end up like Miguel. Blake smoothed the paper flat on the metal shelf, fluorescent light washing out the creases in the handwritten rules. His finger tapped Rule 1. Cell Block D, solitary confinement units. He looked at me direct. You don't clean those during your shift. Ever. I don't care if someone pukes blood all over the floor at 11:30. You log it, you leave it, you come back after 7 a.m. when daylight's through the windows. I nodded. Seems simple enough. The inmates in solitary... Blake paused, choosing words careful. They're serving long sentences, real long. Some of them don't know they're done yet. My grandmother's voice surfaced in my head. Places where spirits refuse to rest, mijo, where suffering soaks into the walls. Done? I asked. Dead. Blake's face stayed flat, but still there, still pacing, still counting days that ran out 20, 30 years back. You go in during shift hours, they know you're there. They want things, attention, contact, release. He shook his head. We can't give them any of that, so we don't go in. The maintenance room felt smaller, colder. Blake moved to Rule 2. Execution chambers on the east wing, past the medical unit. Old electric chairs still in there, decommissioned since they switched to lethal injection. Sometimes around 1 or 2 a.m. you'll hear singing. Hymns, usually. 3, 4 voices in harmony. Ghosts singing hymns, I said. Heard how it sounded. Whatever they are. Blake met my eyes. You hear it? You lock that door from the outside. There's a deadbolt, old brass one, and you walk away. Don't run. Don't look through the window. Just lock it and go. What happens if I don't? Miguel asked the same question. Blake's jaw worked. I told him I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. Still don't. The singing stops eventually on its own, maybe 20 minutes, but you need to be gone before it does. I glanced at the paper. Rule 3. Blake tapped it. Any inmate you see in the corridors after midnight needs to show you their wristband. Every living inmate wears one. Orange for general population, red for high security, yellow for medical. You see someone walking around, you ask polite but firm. If they show you the band, you nod and keep moving. If they can't or won't. He paused. You radio Travis Edwards immediately. Security captain, works nights. He'll handle it. And if they don't have a wristband? Then they're not supposed to be walking anywhere. Blake's voice dropped. Because they're not inmates anymore. They're leftovers. Echoes. You report it. Travis logs it. And we all pretend the walls aren't thinner than they should be between here and wherever those poor bastards ended up. Rule 4 covered the administrative wing. Phantom footsteps, Blake said, heavy boots marching regulation paced down the corridors between 2 and 4 a.m. Officer Alan Neal, killed in '87 during a transfer gone wrong, took a shank to the chest in the north corridor, bled out before the medics arrived. Alan still walks his patrol, Blake said. Same route, same timing, every night. You'll hear him coming, boots on linoleum, keys jangling on his belt. You step aside, face the wall, wait till he passes. What if I don't? Then he knows you're there. Blake's expression went hard. And he might think you're an inmate out of position. Alan was thorough when he was alive. Death didn't change that. Rules 5 and 6 blurred together. Don't use the service elevator between midnight and 3 a.m. Something about the cables in the shaft and a maintenance worker who fell 4 stories back in the 90s. Blake's voice flattened when he explained it, words coming automatic, and I didn't push. Rule 7. The basement morgue. Never investigate sounds from down there, no matter what. Miguel's mistake. The one that cost him. 8 and 9 covered smaller things. Don't clean the chapel alone if the candles light themselves. Don't respond if someone calls your name from an empty cell. Blake folded the paper, pressed it into my hand. Keep this on you, every shift. I tucked it in my shirt pocket. Travis Edwards knows about all this, Blake said. Security captain. He's good people, takes the reports serious. You see something wrong, you radio him. He won't think you're crazy, because he's seen it too. Because everyone who works nights here has seen it. Blake grabbed a rolling cart from against the wall, loaded it with supplies, spray bottles, rags, mop bucket. Come on, I'll walk you through the first round. 11:45. Blake had left me 20 minutes ago, headed back to the staff residence with his shoulders hunched and his keys silent against his hip. Said he'd done his part. Rest was up to me. I pushed the cart down the main corridor, wheels squeaking against polished linoleum. Overhead, fluorescents hummed, half of them flickering at intervals that felt almost deliberate. The facility stretched out around me, concrete and steel and locked doors, everything painted institutional beige or gray. My first stop was supposed to be the administrative offices. Trash bins, surface wiped down, vacuum if needed. Standard work, the kind I could do without thinking. But cell block D sat on my route. Blake had pointed it out during the walkthrough, made me note the entrance. Reinforced door with a narrow window, keycard access, warning signs about solitary confinement protocols. Remember, he'd said, not during shift hours. I slowed as I approached, told myself I was just passing by, just getting familiar with the layout. The cartwheels echoed different here, sound bouncing off closer walls. The door to D block stood closed, solid. A small window at eye level, wire-reinforced glass, maybe 6 inches square. I should have kept walking. My grandmother used to say, curiosity was respect's enemy. You don't stare at sacred places, you don't test spirits just to see what happens. I stopped anyway, looked through the window. The solitary cells stretched down a narrow corridor, 6 on each side, metal doors with observation slots. Dim emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow, and through those slots I saw movement. Pacing, back and forth, same pattern, mechanical and endless. One cell showed a figure in orange, prison jumpsuit, faded, almost white. He walked 4 steps, turned, walked back. 4 steps, turn, repeat. His face stayed angled down, features lost in shadow. Another cell held someone sitting against the far wall, knees drawn up, head moving side to side. Rocking, maybe, or refusing something I couldn't hear. I counted 5 cells with movement, 5 figures serving time in solitary. My hand found the flashlight on my belt. Heavy maglite, the kind that doubled as a weapon if needed. I clicked it on, aimed the beam through the window. The figures vanished, not faded, not walked away. Just gone between one heartbeat and the next. The cells stood empty. Bare mattresses on metal frames, steel toilets, nothing else. But the walls. I pressed closer to the window, angling the light. Scratches covered the concrete, deep gouges, deliberate marks, words carved with something sharp over years of patient work. Names, I realized. Guard names. Peterson, Williams, Cow, Briggs. Others I couldn't make out, overlapping and crossed through. The floors showed stains, rust-colored, spreading from the corners, patterns that suggested someone had bled out slow and thorough. 4 guards killed in the D-block riot of '73, Blake had mentioned. Inmates took the wing for 18 hours before the state police breached. Found the guards in solitary, beaten to death with pieces of broken bed frame. I killed the flashlight. The figures reappeared in my peripheral vision, still pacing, still rocking, still serving sentences that death hadn't commuted. My mouth tasted like copper. I backed away from the door, hands shaking just enough to notice, and grabbed the cart handle. Administrative wing, trash bins, normal work. I made it 15 feet before I heard the singing. Faint at first, barely audible under the fluorescent hum. Voices in harmony, words I couldn't quite catch. Hymns, Blake had said. 3 or 4 voices. I counted 5 distinct parts, weaving together. The execution chamber sat east, past medical. I oriented myself, traced the sound. Yeah, coming from that direction, threading through the corridors. Beautiful, actually. Whoever they'd been in life, they could sing. Rule 2 surfaced clear in my head. Lock the door from outside. Walk away. Don't run. I left the cart against the wall and moved toward the sound. Not to investigate, to follow protocol. Lock it down, contain it, retreat. The medical unit stretched empty, examination rooms dark behind small windows. Past that, a junction. The execution chamber sat at the end of a short hallway, door marked with faded lettering. Authorized personnel only. The singing got louder, richer. 5 voices definitely, maybe 6, harmonizing on something that sounded like Amazing Grace but wasn't quite. Words slightly wrong, melody shifted. The door stood ajar. Just an inch, maybe 2. I should have wondered about that. Should have questioned why it wasn't secured. Instead, I grabbed the handle, cold brass, old enough to show tarnish, and pulled it shut. The deadbolt was there, just like Blake said. Heavy mechanism, probably original to the building. I threw it home. The singing continued, muffled now, but still clear, still beautiful. I turned, started walking, not running. Blake's voice in my head, just lock it and go. Behind me, inside the chamber, something heavy dragged across metal. Scraping, deliberate, the sound of weight being pulled with effort. The singing didn't stop. I kept walking, steady pace. Hands clenched until I reached the junction and turned the corner. Only then did I let myself breathe full, let the tension crack. My first night, not even 1 a.m. yet, 6 more hours to go. I went back for the cart. Couldn't leave it sitting in the middle of the corridor with mop handles sticking up and spray bottles rattling every time someone walked past. Blake would ask questions. Worse, Kennedy might see it on a camera feed and wonder what the hell her new custodian was doing abandoning equipment on his first night. The wheels squeaked with each rotation. Same high-pitched rhythm I'd already memorized. Squeak, squeak, pause. Squeak, squeak, pause. The sound bounced off concrete walls and came back wrong somehow. Doubled up on itself until I couldn't tell if I was hearing my own cart or something else rolling through adjacent corridors. I had administrative offices on the list. Bathrooms, break rooms, Kennedy's office suite. Normal cleaning work that didn't involve doors locking themselves or figures that vanished when light hit them straight on. The route took me past the basement access stairs. Shouldn't have looked. Should have kept my eyes forward and pushed the cart straight past. But the stairwell door stood open maybe 3 inches, and I caught movement in the gap. Not movement exactly. A shift in the darkness, like something down there had noticed me noticing it. Then I heard the voice. Help! Distant, echoing up from somewhere below. Somebody help me. Miguel's voice. Had to be. Same, slightly higher pitch Blake had mentioned when he'd described Miguel calling out before the footage cut off. The sound came from deep in the basement, past where the stairs bottomed out, from the direction Blake said the morgue occupied. I'm stuck back here. The voice bounced off tile and concrete. Behind the freezer units, can't get out. I gripped the cart handle. My grandmother used to say that spirits of the lost called out from places they died, trying to pull the living into the same trap. Didn't matter if you wanted to help. Didn't matter if the voice sounded real and desperate and exactly right. Going to them just added another voice to the chorus. The sound shifted. Now it came from my left, from a utility closet that couldn't possibly connect to the basement. Please, it's cold down here. Then, from behind me. Joel, I know you can hear me. Couldn't come from 3 directions at once, not unless whatever made the sound didn't have a fixed location, didn't follow the normal rules about where voices originated and how they traveled through space. I left the cart again, walked away at the same steady pace Blake had demonstrated, not running, but not lingering either. Behind me, Miguel's voice called out twice more, each time from a different impossible angle, before cutting off completely. The administrative wing stretched quiet and fluorescent bright ahead. Linoleum floors instead of concrete, acoustic ceiling tiles instead of exposed ductwork, bulletin boards with OSHA notices, and Employee of the Month photos from 1997, normal enough that I almost relaxed. Then I heard the footsteps. Not one person. A group moving in formation, boots hitting linoleum in perfect synchronized rhythm. March, 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 steady and mechanical. The sound of guards doing rounds or inmates being moved in lockstep from one section to another. But the corridor ahead stood empty. Every door closed. Every office dark behind interior windows. The footsteps kept coming, growing louder, and I pressed myself against the wall next to a water fountain, remembering Blake's rule about Officer Neal and giving him space to pass. The formation marched past. I counted 8 distinct sets of footsteps, felt the air pressure change as bodies moved through space I occupied, caught a whiff of old sweat and gun oil and something chemical I couldn't name. The temperature dropped maybe 10 degrees for the 5 seconds they took to pass my position. Then warmth returned and the footsteps faded down the corridor behind me, still in perfect rhythm until they turned a corner that led nowhere except a wall. I stood there breathing, watching condensation from my breath fade in air that shouldn't be cold enough to show it. The elevator waited at the end of the administrative wing, old industrial model with accordion gate instead of modern doors. Brass floor indicator above showing it currently sat at ground level. I needed to go up 1 floor to reach Kennedy's office suite. Pressed the call button. The motor engaged somewhere in the shaft with a grinding whir, cables moving, counterweights shifting. The floor indicator didn't move. The elevator stayed at ground level according to the brass needle, but I heard it climbing, passing 1st floor, passing 2nd, going higher than the building actually went. The accordion gate rattled open. Inside, the elevator car stretched wrong. Deeper than it should be, like someone had added 15 feet to the back. Fluorescent strips on the ceiling flickered over a space crammed with filing cabinets and a metal desk where 3 figures in guard uniforms from maybe the 80s sat processing paperwork. They didn't look up, just kept writing on forms, stamping documents, moving papers from one stack to another with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd done the same task for decades. The floor indicator above the elevator showed a 4. Building only went to 3 floors. I'd seen it from outside, counted the windows, checked the directory posted near the main entrance. One of the figures reached for a fresh form. His hand passed through the paper twice before managing to grip it solid enough to move it to the center of his desk. I let the gate rattle closed. Didn't step inside. Didn't call out. Didn't ask what the hell they were processing or why they needed a 4th floor that couldn't exist. Just backed away and found the stairs, climbed them manually with my legs shaking enough that I had to grip the railing. Blake's rules hadn't covered the 4th floor specifically, but the principle held. Don't engage. Don't investigate. See something wrong, you log it, and move on. I made it through Kennedy's office suite on autopilot. Emptied trash, wiped down surfaces, vacuumed carpet that didn't need vacuuming. The work settled my hands, gave me something normal to focus on while my brain processed phantom formations and elevators to nowhere. Was heading back toward the maintenance room, thinking maybe I could hide there until Blake showed up for shift change, when I saw the inmate near the infirmary entrance. He stood under a flickering light, one hand pressed against the wall, the other clutching his stomach. Orange jumpsuit, standard issue. Dark hair, lean build, maybe mid-30s. Pale in a way that read sick, rather than just prison pale. "Hey." His voice came out rough. "Hey, I need medical." I stopped 10 feet back. Checked my watch. 2:30 in the morning. Checked the corridor. Empty, except for us. Checked his wrists. No band. No orange. No red. No yellow. Just bare skin showing below his jumpsuit sleeves. "What's your name?" I kept my voice level. Didn't move closer. "Shane Romero. I'm in C block. Something's wrong. I think my appendix or—" Shane Romero. I'd read that name somewhere in the protocols. Took me 3 seconds to place it. Executed 1994. Electric chair. Blake had mentioned him specifically as one of the ones who came back, who tried to trick new staff into letting them through locked doors or accessing areas they shouldn't reach. Show me your wristband. I already knew he couldn't, but Blake had emphasized following the protocol exactly, giving them the chance to prove they belonged. I don't. They took it off for medical processing. I'm telling you, I'm sick. Step into the light. He did, moved directly under the fluorescent strip, and for a second, he looked completely real, solid and present and genuinely ill, sweating and shaking and desperate in a way I recognized from my own face in the mirror 3 months back when the eviction notice came. But I made myself look closer, made myself check the details instead of accepting the surface. His jumpsuit showed scorch marks, small ones around the collar, larger patches on the shoulders and chest where fabric had burned and melted and somehow repaired itself into a mockery of prison uniform. The orange had faded to brown in spots, edges crispy in a way laundry couldn't explain. His wrists, where I'd looked for the band. Rope burns circled both of them, deep grooves in flesh that wept clear fluid instead of blood. I can't let you into medical, I said. You need to return to your cell. I'm dying here. Shane Romero was executed in 1994. The words came out steady despite my pulse hammering in my ears. You're not an inmate. You're not getting past me. His face changed. Started at the eyes, whites going yellow, then gray, then black as the flesh around them loosened and pulled away from bone. His cheeks hollowed, skin peeling in strips that curled back to reveal muscle gone rotten beneath. The jaw dropped open too far, hinges separating, and I watched his tongue darken and shrivel while he screamed at me with a voice that echoed from a throat already collapsed. I stood there frozen, watching Shane Romero's executed face decompose in the fluorescent light, his skull emerging inch by inch from flesh that no longer remembered how to hold its shape. Shane Romero screamed. The sound tore through the corridor, rattling in my chest. Not human anymore. Something that came from a throat full of voltage and charred flesh. Something that had been screaming for 30 years in whatever hell electric chairs sent people to. Every fluorescent fixture in the corridor exploded, not one by one, all at once. 12 tubes burst in perfect synchronization, glass spraying down in a rain that caught the emergency exit light at the far end. The sound was massive. 12 shotgun blasts compressed into a single crack that left my ears ringing. Sparks cascaded from the ceiling fixtures, white and orange against the sudden darkness, arcing across exposed wiring before dying out. The scorch marks appeared on the walls. Black streaks radiated outward from where Shane had been standing, spreading across the concrete in patterns that looked almost deliberate. The marks climbed 8 feet up both walls, carbon shadows that reminded me of burn patterns I'd seen on job sites after electrical fires, except these were shaped wrong, too symmetrical, too precise. The smell hit me, ozone and burning meat, the same smell that had been coming off Shane's decomposing face. I backed away from where the figure had stood moments before. My boots crunched on glass. The corridor stretched behind me, lit only by that single emergency exit sign 40 feet down. Red light barely penetrated the darkness between us. The scorch marks were still visible, though, darker patches against dark concrete, radiating from an empty spot on the floor. Shane was gone. Just gone. No body, no ash, nothing but those burn patterns and the chemical stink hanging in the air. My hands were shaking. I noticed because I was still holding the mag light, and the beam was dancing across the walls, catching on fragments of shattered fluorescent tubes scattered across the floor. I tried to steady my grip, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. The flashlight beam kept jerking, kept finding those scorch marks. I should have gone back to the maintenance room, logged the incident, followed protocol. Instead, I kept walking. My cart was somewhere behind me. I'd abandoned it when I'd first encountered Shane. My cleaning route was shot to hell. But my feet kept moving, carrying me deeper into the facility on pure momentum, and I didn't have the presence of mind to stop them. The corridor branched. I took the left fork without thinking, following the gentle curve past darkened administrative offices. My maglite picked out familiar landmarks, the water fountain where I'd pressed myself against the wall when the phantom guards marched past, the bulletin board with staff schedules and safety notices, the heavy door leading to the records archive. The chapel entrance appeared on my right. I'd been walking on autopilot, but the sight of that door stopped me cold. Double doors, solid oak, older than the rest of the facility. A small window set at eye level. Wire mesh reinforced between two panes of glass. Light spilled through that window. Warm, flickering, candlelight. Blake's Rule 8 surfaced in my memory. Don't clean the chapel alone if the candles light themselves. Walk away and log it. I should have walked away. My grandmother Shannon used to tell me that curiosity was how spirits tested you. They'd show you something impossible, something beautiful or terrible, and wait to see if you'd step closer. The smart ones walked away. The dead ones always took one more step. I took one more step. The maglite beam hit the window at an angle, and I pressed my face close to see inside. Dozens of executed inmates knelt in prayer formation. They filled every pew, 6 rows deep, all facing the altar. Orange jumpsuits, all of them. Their heads were bowed, hands clasped, postures perfect. The candlelight came from hundreds of candles, lining the walls, clustered on the altar, sitting on the floor between the pews. None of them had been there during my orientation tour this afternoon. The chapel had been empty then, just wooden pews and a simple altar with a cross. The cross was still there. But something massive moved behind it. A shadow. Too large for the space, too dark for the candlelight to penetrate. It shifted back and forth behind the altar with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Left, right, left, right. The movement made my eyes hurt, made my brain try to reject what I was seeing because the geometry was wrong. The shadow was too tall for the ceiling height, too wide for the chapel walls. The inmates were chanting. I couldn't make out the words through the door, just a low, rhythmic murmur that rose and fell. 50 voices, maybe 60, all synchronized. The sound had a texture to it, something that pressed against the door and leaked through the cracks around the frame. My hand was on the door handle before I realized I'd moved. The brass was ice cold. Frost formed on my palm where skin met metal, and I jerked back. The chanting continued, unchanged. The candles kept flickering. The shadow kept moving behind the altar. I pushed the door open. The smell came first, old wood and candle wax, but underneath that, decomposition. Not fresh, not the immediate rot of roadkill in summer heat. This was older, drier. The smell of things that had been dead so long they'd moved past decay into something else. The chanting resolved into words. Justice delayed, justice denied, justice delayed, justice denied. Over and over, 60 voices in perfect unison. The inmates didn't turn to look at me, didn't acknowledge the door opening, the light from my maglite sweeping across their backs. They just kept chanting, kept swaying slightly in their pews, hands clasped and heads bowed. I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me on its own. No wind, no mechanism, just a slow, deliberate movement that ended with a soft click. The shadow behind the altar stopped moving. It turned toward me. I felt it turn even though I couldn't see eyes, couldn't see a face. Just that massive darkness that shouldn't fit in the space it occupied, focusing its attention on me with the weight of a physical thing. One inmate stood, 3rd row, left side. He rose smoothly, his movements too fluid, and turned to face me. His head was partially severed. The cut went from his left shoulder up through his neck, stopping just below his right ear. The wound gaped open, showing vertebrae and dried tissue. his head tilted at an angle that should have been impossible, held on by a thin strip of skin and muscle. When he spoke, the wound flexed. "Your judgment hasn't arrived yet." His voice was conversational, matter-of-fact, the same tone Blake used when explaining the route to the maintenance room. I couldn't move. Couldn't look away from that wound, from the anatomical cross-section of his throat visible in the candlelight. I'd seen injuries on job sites. A guy who caught a circular saw blade to the thigh, another who took a nail gun to the hand. But nothing like this. Nothing that should have left someone standing and talking. "The rest of us," he continued, gesturing at the kneeling figures around him, "we've received ours. Some deserved. Some—" The wound flexed again as he tilted his head further, considering. "Some less clear." The chanting had stopped. 60 heads remained bowed, but I could feel their attention on me now. Waiting. "You're not one of us yet," the inmate said, "but you work in a place of judgment. Walk these halls, clean these floors." He smiled, and the expression pulled at the edges of his wound. "Eventually, everyone here receives what's owed." The altar cracked. Not a small crack. A massive split that ran down the center of the wooden structure with a sound like a tree trunk breaking. The cross tilted, fell, clattered against the floor. The crack widened, edges pulling apart to reveal darkness underneath. Not just darkness. An absence. A void that light couldn't penetrate, that my eyes couldn't focus on. The crack kept spreading, kept widening, and I realized there was no floor beneath the altar. Just that endless pit, that absence of everything opening up like a mouth. The chanting started again, louder this time. "Justice delayed, justice denied, justice delayed, justice denied." 60 voices all turned toward me now. The inmates had raised their heads, and I could see their faces in the candlelight. Execution scars, rope burns, bullet wounds, scorch marks from the electric chair. Every method the state had used over the decades, written on their flesh. The pit was still widening. I fled. Spun toward the door, grabbed the handle, yanked it open. The chanting followed me, growing louder, the words blending into a roar that wasn't quite sound. More like pressure, like something physical pushing at my back. I ran. Down the corridor, past the administrative offices, my maglite beam bouncing wildly across walls and floor. The chanting pursued me for 50 feet, 60, then cut off abruptly. The silence was worse. Just my footsteps and my breathing and the blood pounding in my ears. I stopped at the junction where the corridor branched toward the cell blocks. My hands were still shaking. Worse now. I pressed my back against the wall and tried to breathe. Tried to think. The protocols weren't just superstitions. The understanding settled into my chest, cold and certain. Blake's handwritten rules, the ones he'd given me with such urgency. They weren't folklore or veteran hazing. They were boundaries, actual functional boundaries that kept me safe from whatever the hell was happening in this facility. Miguel had ignored Rule 7. Investigated sounds from the basement morgue. Security found his flashlight but never found him. I'd followed Rule 3. Checked Shane Romero's wristband, recognized the name from Blake's warnings, refused him access. Shane had screamed and exploded the lights, but I'd walked away intact. I'd violated Rule 8, entered the chapel when the candles had lit themselves, and I'd barely made it out. My grandmother's stories came back to me. Shannon sitting on her porch in the evening, braiding her gray hair, telling me about places where spirits refused to rest. Places where violence or injustice or sheer human suffering soaked into the ground, into the walls, until the boundary between the living world and whatever came after wore thin. "Some places remember," she'd said. "Remember what happened there, what was done there. And the spirits caught in that memory, they can't move on, can't rest. They just repeat and repeat, trying to resolve something that can't be resolved. I'd thought it was folklore. Stories from the old days, metaphors for historical trauma. But I was witnessing exactly what she'd warned about. I stood at the junction leading to the cell blocks, breathing hard, understanding the protocols differently now. They weren't superstitions. They were boundaries that kept you on the living side of something very thin. My clipboard showed the basement morgue as permanently sealed. Administrative note dated March of last year, Kennedy's signature at the bottom, red stamp across the work order that read, "Area closed. No custodial access required." But I'd heard Miguel's voice down there, heard something moving in that darkness. The basement access door stood 3 inches open, same as earlier. I'd walked past it then, following protocol. Rule 7. Don't investigate sounds from the basement morgue. I pulled the folded paper from my shirt pocket, Blake's handwriting clear under the corridor's fluorescent light. Rule 7 in black ink, underlined twice. Miguel's fatal mistake spelled out in 15 words. My grandmother Shannon used to say that some places hold on to death different than others. Places where the boundary wore thin from violence or suffering, where spirits got stuck repeating their trauma because they couldn't move forward or back, just caught in the moment of their worst pain, playing it over and over. I dismissed it as folklore, stories to teach respect for burial sites and sacred ground. The basement door stood open. My paperwork said sealed. Someone was lying, and I needed to know which version was true. I pushed the door wider. It swung on silent hinges, recently oiled despite being permanently closed. The concrete stairwell descended 15 feet, lit by a single caged bulb at the bottom that cast everything in yellow-gray. I started down. Each step echoed wrong, bouncing back too quick from walls that felt closer than they looked. The temperature dropped 10 degrees by the time I reached the bottom. My breath came out visible, small clouds that hung in the still air before dissolving. The basement corridor stretched 40 feet, doors on both sides with small wire-reinforced windows. Storage rooms, old maintenance areas, supply closets with inventory tags from the 80s. At the far end, a wider door with morgue stenciled in faded black letters. No crime scene tape, no official seal. Just a door that should have been locked if the paperwork told the truth. I reached for my radio, thumb on the call button. Stopped. What would I say? That I'd violated Rule 7 because my clipboard didn't match reality? The morgue door stood closed, but not latched. A vertical line of darkness showed where the seal didn't quite meet the frame. I pushed it open. The smell hit first. Formaldehyde and something underneath it. Copper and rot and chemicals that didn't quite cover what they were meant to preserve. 3 examination tables arranged in a row. Stainless steel surfaces reflecting the overhead fluorescent panels. Bodies lay on all 3 tables. Transparent. I could see through them to the metal beneath, but they had shape and substance. Detailed enough that I made out features and clothing, and the specific ways they died. The nearest one wore an orange jumpsuit. His chest convulsed in rhythm, back arching off the table, muscles seizing. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Scorch marks radiated from his temples where the electrodes would have been placed. The convulsion lasted 4 seconds, then his body went slack. 3 seconds of stillness. Then the cycle started again. Chest convulsing, back arching, mouth screaming nothing into the cold air. The second table held a woman, also transparent, also repeating. Her throat worked in a swallowing motion, eyes bulging, face darkening to purple-black before fading back to normal skin tone. 5 seconds of choking. 2 seconds of reset. Then it started over. Chemical execution, the kind where something went wrong with the injection sequence and they strangled on their own paralyzed lungs for 18 minutes before dying. The third figure jerked against invisible restraints, head snapping sideways with force that should have broken his neck. The motion repeated every 7 seconds, hanging, but the drop hadn't been calculated right. Too short. He'd strangled instead of having his neck break clean. I stood there watching them loop. Botched executions, every one. The kinds that made headlines and sparked protests and got procedures changed. But the changes came after. Never helped the ones who'd already died wrong. My radio crackled. "You down there?" Blake's voice tight with something between anger and fear. I keyed the mic. "Yeah, in the morgue." "Jesus, get out now." "My paperwork says this area's sealed, permanently closed, no custodial access required." Static for 3 seconds. "What are you seeing?" I described the 3 tables, the transparent bodies, the loops they couldn't escape. More static. Blake's breathing came through rough. "The paperwork lies. Kennedy updates it every year, keeps marking it sealed so new hires won't go down there. But the morgue's still active, still holding what it held. Which is what? You know where you are? The land under this facility?" My grandmother's voice came back. Stories about the valley, about the places her people considered sacred, because that's where spirits gathered when they couldn't rest. Burial grounds and massacre sites, and anywhere enough suffering happened that the boundary got worn too thin to hold. "Paiute burial ground," I said. "Part of one. The prison got built here in '53 because the land was cheap and remote. Nobody cared about sacred ground back then, or they cared and built here anyway because it was convenient. Then they added the execution chamber in '68. Been carrying out death sentences here for 56 years. The figure on the first table convulsed again. 4 seconds of electrical current that never stopped flowing in whatever place he existed. "Executions on sacred ground where spirits already gathered," I said. "That created something. A convergence. That's what Miguel called it before he disappeared. All these unresolved deaths stacking on top of burial sites that were already spiritually active. The prison for the living sits right on top of a prison for the dead, and they overlap in places. The execution chamber, cell block D, where the riot happened, this morgue. Anywhere enough people died with anger or injustice or unfinished business." The woman on the second table choked silently. Her eyes found mine for half a second before the reset came. "They see me," I said. "They see everyone. They're still experiencing their deaths, but they're aware enough to know they're stuck. That's the worst part. It's not just replaying. It's replaying while they're conscious of the loop." I thought about the inmates in the chapel, the massive shadow behind the altar, the crack that opened into void. Justice delayed, justice denied. They'd all received their judgments, deserved or not, and now they couldn't move past them. "Previous custodians tried to help them," Blake said through the radio. "Miguel wasn't the first. Back in '74, a guy named Chen went down there with a priest. They found Chen 3 days later in cell block D. No memory of how he got there and no priest with him. In '89, someone tried burning sage through the whole basement level. Fire suppression system kicked on, flooded everything, and when maintenance pumped it out, they found her work boots sitting empty in front of the morgue door. Just the boots, laces still tied. The figure on the third table jerked against his invisible noose. 7 seconds, regular as a clock. Every protocol in that list represents someone who tried to investigate or help or fix what was happening here," Blake continued. "And every single one of them either disappeared or barely got out. The rules aren't about being cruel or ignoring suffering. They're about accepting that some things can't be resolved. Your job isn't to help these people. It's to maintain the boundary between the living side and the dead side, so they don't bleed together more than they already have." I looked at the 3 transparent figures, locked in their worst moments forever. My grandmother would have said they needed proper burial rites, prayers in the old language, tobacco offerings, and respect for the dead. But Blake was right. I wasn't here to fix this. Nobody could fix this. The facility had spent 56 years executing people on sacred ground where the boundary was already thin, and that convergence had created something that couldn't be undone. The protocols existed to keep staff alive by teaching them not to engage, not to investigate, not to try helping what couldn't be helped. The only role I could serve was maintaining separation, following the rules, keeping the living world and the world of condemned spirits from collapsing into each other completely. I backed toward the morgue door, watching the loops continue. The protocols weren't cruelty. They were the only wisdom anyone had managed to extract from decades of loss. I stayed in that basement corridor for another minute, radio silent in my hand, breath visible in the cold air. Blake hadn't said anything else after explaining about the convergence. Didn't need to. The 3 figures on those examination tables kept cycling through their deaths, and I kept my feet moving toward the stairs. The climb back up felt longer than the descent. Each step echoed different now that I understood what I was hearing. Not just sound bouncing off concrete, but something traveling between layers of a place that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Living facility, spiritual wound, prison for both the breathing and the condemned. My watch showed 4:38 when I reached the ground floor, 2.5 hours left on my shift. I pulled the basement door shut behind me and heard the latch click into place with a sound like finality, though I knew now that latches and locks meant different things down there than they did up here. The cleaning cart still sat where I'd left it near the darkened administrative corridor. Glass fragments from the exploded fluorescent tubes crunched under my boots as I approached. The scorch marks Shane Romero had left on the walls remained visible even in the dim emergency lighting. Symmetrical patterns radiating outward, permanent evidence of what happened when the dead got too close to the living and the boundary between failed completely. I should have been logging these incidents, should have been filling out maintenance reports and notifying Kennedy about the destroyed lights and damaged walls. But Blake's protocols didn't mention paperwork. They mentioned survival, walking away, not investigating, maintaining separation. The distinction felt crucial now. I resumed my route on autopilot, pushing the squeaking cart through corridors I'd already cleaned, double-checking bathrooms and break rooms that didn't need attention. Busy work, movement, anything to keep my hands occupied while my brain processed what the last 6 hours had taught me. By 5:15, I'd circled back to the maintenance room. Blake's handwritten rules still sat in my shirt pocket, the paper warm from body heat. I pulled it out and read through all 9 again under the fluorescent lights, seeing different words than I had at 11 p.m. Not restrictions, protections. Each rule represented someone. Chen, who disappeared for 3 days trying to help in cell block D. The custodian in 89, whose empty boots were found outside the morgue after attempting to burn sage. Miguel, who'd lasted 8 months before investigating sounds from the basement and never coming back up. The protocols were a map drawn in blood and loss, showing exactly where the boundary between worlds wore thin enough to fail completely. They marked the pressure points where 56 years of state executions on Paiute burial ground had created something the living weren't equipped to fix or contain, only to navigate carefully, following rules that kept us on our side of a line we couldn't see but could definitely cross. I thought about my grandmother Shannon, sitting on her porch in the evening heat, telling me stories I'd half listened to while checking my phone or thinking about construction schedules. Stories about places where violence soaked into earth and wouldn't wash out. About land that remembered suffering and held onto it, creating thin spots where spirits got stuck between proper death and improper rest. She'd been teaching me, preparing me for exactly this kind of place, though neither of us knew it at the time. "The old places remember," she'd said once, braiding her gray hair while monsoon clouds built on the horizon. Your people understood that, knew which ground was sacred, which was cursed, which was just earth. White folks don't make those distinctions. They see empty land and think it's blank, but nothing's blank. Everything remembers. I'd nodded without really hearing. Thought it was folklore. Cultural heritage that didn't apply to my life in Vegas, working construction, paying rent, living in the modern world where land was just property and buildings were just structures. Blackwater had taught me different in 6 hours. The facility sat on burial ground. Sacred earth, where my ancestors had understood the boundary between living and dead, needed careful respect. Then the state built a prison there in 53, added an execution chamber in 68, spent 56 years conducting death sentences on land that was already spiritually active, stacking unresolved executions on top of desecrated burial sites until the convergence became permanent. Shannon would have recognized this place immediately, would have known what the singing from the execution chamber meant, what the transparent figures in the morgue represented, why Cell Block D held inmates who'd served their full sentences and couldn't leave. She'd tried to tell me. I just hadn't understood the language. But Blake had spoken it clearly from the beginning. "These are the real protocols," he'd said, handing me that folded paper in the maintenance room. "They keep custodians alive. Not rules for cleaning, rules for surviving." Dawn light started filtering through the high windows near the ceiling around 6:20. Gray at first, then gradually warming toward pale gold as the sun cleared the horizon somewhere beyond the concrete walls and razor wire. The fluorescent lights stayed on. They ran 24 hours in a facility that never truly slept. But the quality of illumination shifted as natural light joined artificial. My shift ended at 7. I had 40 minutes left. I spent them organizing supplies that were already organized, checking inventory that didn't need checking, wiping down surfaces in the maintenance room that showed no dust. Blake's earlier rounds had been thorough. There wasn't actually work to do. But I needed the motion, the familiar rhythm of custodial tasks, something to ground me while the larger understanding settled into place. The job wasn't about cleaning a prison. It was about maintaining an ancient barrier between worlds that the state had unknowingly violated, then kept violating for over half a century. Every night, custodians walked the boundary between the living facility and its spiritual twin, following protocols that had been learned through terrible experience and written down as simple rules to keep new hires from becoming additional casualties in a convergence nobody in administration wanted to acknowledge officially. Kennedy updated the paperwork annually, marked the morgue as permanently closed, kept the protocols vague in official documentation. But she knew. Blake knew. Travis Edwards in security probably knew. They all understood what Blackwater really was and what working night shift actually required. Not education or experience, but willingness to follow rules without demanding explanations that would sound insane if spoken aloud. I thought about Miguel. 8 months he'd lasted, following protocols, staying safe. Then one night he'd heard sounds from the basement and made a choice. Investigated instead of logged and walked away. Descended those stairs and never came back up, leaving only his flashlight near the morgue entrance as evidence he'd existed at all. The protocols had failed him because he'd stopped following them. Thought he could help or fix or understand. But the convergence wasn't something individuals could repair. It was structural, foundational. 56 years of institutional violence on desecrated sacred ground, creating a wound between worlds that would outlast everyone currently breathing. Our job, Blake's, mine, whoever came after us, was to maintain the separation. Follow the boundaries. Keep the living and dead from collapsing together completely by respecting the rules that marked where each belonged. My watch showed 6:55. I pulled out Blake's paper one more time, reading through the 9 rules with full comprehension now. Each one a lesson purchased through loss. Each boundary a protection earned through someone's disappearance or trauma or narrow escape. I folded the paper carefully and returned it to my shirt pocket. I knew I'd continue working at Blackwater, knew I'd follow every rule precisely, maintain every boundary exactly as instructed. The job paid $32,000 annually with free housing, which solved my immediate financial crisis. But that wasn't why I'd stay. I'd stay because someone needed to, because the barrier required maintenance and the protocols required carriers. People willing to learn them, follow them, eventually teach them to whoever came next. The work was necessary in ways that had nothing to do with paychecks and everything to do with keeping a spiritual wound from spreading beyond the concrete walls that currently contained it. Shannon's people had always understood places where spirits refused to rest, had known how to recognize them, respect them, maintain proper boundaries around them. That knowledge had passed down through generations in stories I'd dismissed as folklore. But I carried it now, understood it, would use it to survive and maintain what previous custodians had learned to respect through blood and tragedy. The role was guardian, not janitor, threshold keeper, not maintenance worker. I accepted that as 7 a.m. arrived, and my first shift ended with me still breathing, still sane, still on the living side of a boundary I'd learned to see.